Thank you very much indeed, Christine. That was tremendous, brilliant. I'm just going to give a minute or so for the others to get their videos on. I think everyone is almost lit up there. Yeah. Great, fantastic. Thanks again, Christine. So again, just want to reiterate a good evening to everybody and welcome. And first of all, I want to thank the Irish Women's Lobby for inviting me to moderate the international panel at this wonderful International Women's Day event and to congratulate them on this new venture. I think it's very exciting to see the emergence of new women's groups in Ireland, and in particular those that attest to an agenda for radical change. And as Rachel said there at the end, you know, that are ready and prepared to embrace the fear. So let me start by extending a Céad Míle Fáilte to our 5 esteemed guest speakers and an equally warm welcome to the 500 plus attendees who are logged on at the moment across Ireland and throughout the world. I mean, it's worth noting that in recent years, as we have witnessed a global escalation of in political extremism, in nationalism, xenophobia, women have become an easy target for those who seek to subdue, moderate or obliterate the voices of women from public discourse. And I think this has been addressed, you know, with some of the speakers on the earlier panel. We have the hubris of a lot of single issue activists and unrepresentative NGOs who've hijacked the rendering of feminism in Ireland. And recent attempts by various women to freely associate or organise together has been framed as seditious, whilst forming alliances of solidarity with our sisters overseas is declared an act of treason. So in light of the testimony we've heard already from our previous speakers, it's not difficult to see why the patriarchs of the state and the sex trade capitalists might indeed want to moderate the voices of Irish women. So for this reason, it is heartening and almost subversive, to be frank, to be sitting here this evening in the company of our wonderful panelists, who without further ado, I will now introduce to you. So our first speaker is going to be Julie Bindel. Julie is joining us from England and is a journalist, a feminist, a campaigner, a writer, a broadcaster and a researcher whose extensive work has addressed concerns about male violence against women and children, with particular regard to prostitution, stalking, religious fundamentalism and human trafficking. Julie has authored over 30 book chapters and writes regularly for The Guardian newspaper, The New Statesman, Truth Dig, The Sunday Telegraph and Standpoint magazines, and she appears regularly on the BBC and Sky News. This evening, Julie will address freedom of speech for feminists who advocate against male violence. So you're welcome, Julie. Our second speaker is Clara Berglund from Sweden. Clara is Secretary General of the Swedish Women's Lobby, which is a non-partisan, independent umbrella organisation for a broad range of women's organisations in Sweden. Clara contributes to many European and international policy forums on the issue of women's rights, and this evening she will speak to the convergence of the far-right and neoliberal movements and its impacts on women's rights. Welcome, Clara. Our third panellist is Yağmur Uygarkezi. Yağmur was born in Turkey, grew up in Italy and France, studied in England, and is joining us this evening from Paris. A graduate in political science, she's a member of a group called Radical Girls, that's girls with a lot of S's at the end of it, which is the young women's movement within the European network of migrant women. Yağmur has been conducting research on prostitution and veiling for several years, and her texts are available in English, French and Italian. This evening, Yağmur will speak on challenges facing young women today and what they can do about them. Jak Shamlar, Yağmur. The fourth international speaker is Dr. Kathleen Stock. Kathleen is a professor of philosophy at the University of Sussex, and she's written extensively on aesthetics, fiction, imagination, sex, gender, and sexual orientation. She has a growing interest in feminist philosophy, including the nature of sexual objectification and the nature of womanhood. Her recent book, titled Material Girls, Why Reality Matters for Feminism, is currently on pre-order, and in January of this year, Kathleen was awarded an OBE in recognition of her services to higher education. This evening, Kathleen will speak on freedom of speech in academia. So you're welcome, Kathleen. And our final speaker is Gail Dines, joining us tonight from the United States. Gail is Professor Emerita of Sociology and Women's Studies at Wheelock College in Boston and has been researching and writing about the porn industry and sexual violence for more than 30 years. She is the founder, president, and CEO of Culture Reframed, which is the first organisation to recognise and address hypersexualised media and pornography as, and I quote, the public health crisis of the digital age. A consultant to governmental bodies internationally, Gail has been described as one of the leading anti-porn scholars and activists in the world, and her book Pornland, How Porn Has Hijacked Our Sexuality, which was published in 2010, has been translated into 4 languages. Tonight, Gail will speak to you on the industrial nature of pornography. You're welcome, Gail. So that being an intro to all of our guests, I will remind everyone that each speaker will have 10 minutes to speak to their topic. And I'll start now by inviting Julie to take the proverbial floor. Julie.
Thank you. And I'm really thrilled to be with you. I wish I was physically with you, of course, but maybe next year. So I really appreciate the invitation to speak about women-only spaces and the sex-based rights that feminists have fought for. Not just second wave feminism, but our 4 sisters going way back, well over 100 years. And I think we need to recognise where the pushback is coming from, in my view, based on plenty of evidence over a number of years of being targeted by extreme trans activists, where this is coming from. Have capitulated and gone along with this ideology. And just in case we need reminding, men have always hated women-only space for the simple reason that it not only excludes them, but it prevents them from monitoring and controlling what we do. Now, if this sounds over the top, have a think about the times that you women have been in a bar or just out with a girlfriend or a small group of all women, and men will come up and say, what are you ladies or you girls doing on your own? Now, I remember being at a fundraiser where there were almost 500 women, and I was going down the stairs from the venue to a shared bar where there were men drinking and talking about why there were so many women upstairs. And one of them said, there's about 500 women up there on their own. And I pointed out that it's a little bit difficult to be on your own if you're with 499 other women. But of course, once he clocked that many of us were lesbians, it changed then to, can you give us a bit of kind of girl on girl action? How about a sex show? Some kind of naughty girls sharing their huge toy kind of porn genre, because of course men have to always be involved and they can't bear women to autonomously organise, and that's what it's about. Now, women-only spaces are not just crucial to avoid kind of unwanted attention, sexual harassment, sexual assault, but also to be able to disclose to other women, to each other, about what men do to us. And we all know that for generation after generation of women, until we get together with other women and say, my husband beats me, he rapes me, I was flashed at as a girl, I was sexually assaulted by my stepfather, I was raped by my gym teacher, I'm being sexually harassed in the workplace and I feel like I'm to blame somehow. Until we talk to each other about that, we can't possibly know that it's not just the odd, crazy man and that we're not inviting this attention unknowingly. And that is the bedrock of the women's liberation movement. We know that the second that one man is in a room of women, students and academics will know this. If there's one man in your seminar group, the atmosphere changes instantly. The dynamic changes. Half of the women will resent him being there and suspect his motives. And the other half will run around defending him and speaking up for him. and actually praising him, giving him a special prize for being the only man there, feeling sorry for him. So if we think about how that actually moves from women being often too nervous or frightened to say to men, we want this space for our own, to how that translates into the law, it's crucial. Early second wave feminists, not just in the global north, but in the global south also, physically built refuges and rape crisis helplines, safe houses for women and their children to escape violent men, to report violent men. That's what we did. We did it without pay. We did it without grants. We did it without funding. We built them because we needed them. And eventually we managed to get them mainstream, but they've always been under threat. If we didn't have male violence, we wouldn't care. It wouldn't be an issue. I personally wouldn't really care about seeing a piece of gristle hanging down between a man's legs in a changing room if I didn't think that he might rape me. And the one thing that women around the world share, because many, many things divide us, but the one thing we all share, women and girls, is the fear and reality of male violence. Now, by that, I don't mean that we walk around needing smelling salts, that we're constantly imagining that we're going to be raped. What it means is that we recognize the threat from men, the threat that comes with, in my country, one woman every 3 days being killed by a former or current partner, by woman after woman after woman being raped. We know that this is the reality that binds women together. And we know that's why we've got single sex spaces, and why we have, because we fought for the right for that to be enshrined in law. Now everything is under threat. And all of the feminist activists and our allies on this webinar will know that nothing's ever carved in stone, that struggles mean that you take 1 step forward, 2 steps back, that we have to fight constantly to maintain and even grab back the rights that we lose over and over again. If men didn't terrorize, beat or kill women for the simple reason that we're women, there wouldn't be any need for any of these services. But the offence of rape, certainly under most legislative frameworks, specifically determines that this is penetration by a penis. And on the end of that penis, contrary to some popular beliefs, there is always a male person, always. So why would we then rewrite reality and science and suggest that male violence somehow becomes not a threat at all, in fact impossible, because it's being committed by a trans woman? We know across British prisons in England that 50% of trans women living amongst the women's estate are convicted sex offenders. Convicted. Do we all know how rare it is to get a conviction when a man rapes or sexually assaults a woman or child? It's nigh on impossible. Let me just give you a figure from my country, which is that from the rapes reported, and we know that that's the minority of assaults on women, the rapes reported, only 1.5% get to court, and around 65% of those end in a conviction. We're talking about a 1% conviction rate at the moment. Now, if you're a woman who's been raped, you are very likely more, well, not just very likely, you are statistically more likely to go to prison because of the chaos and trauma that that rape causes you than is your rapist. This is why we give a damn about trans women in women's prisons. These women are the most abused on the planet. And then a tiny bit about the ideology that underpins this. As I said at the beginning, this is pure misogyny. This is men wanting their rights. This is perfect for the liberals, for the so-called progressive men who say they support feminism, until we say that we actually want them out of our spaces and we have our own rights, because it affects the rights that they have over us, even the gay men. So the pro-prostitution lobby that Ruth Breslin spoke about earlier, it's the same lobby as the extreme trans activists. They greet me at my talks, my public talks, shouting, blowjobs are real jobs, telling me that trans women can only make money for their surgery by doing sex work. When I launched my prostitution book in 2017, I was met with this baying mob of blue fringes. And at the same time, Rachel Moran was in Italy launching the Italian version of her book, and she had a similar mob, different country, same bullshit. So what do we do about it? We cannot capitulate. We cannot. The more we actually stay silent, the worse it will get. Extreme transgender ideology is even seeped into the animal rights movement. There's a woman who joined an animal rights group in Washington, D.C. I interviewed recently, and she was reprimanded by a non-binary member of her group who told her it was hurtful to hear her describe the abuse of female cows in the dairy trade. The non-binary member said, "You're not allowed to say dairy comes from female cows or eggs come from female chickens because we don't know their gender identity." This is not a parody. This is not a joke. What we have to do is demand that we have and maintain our single-sex spaces and our laws, and don't let any organisation take them away from us under the guise of trans rights. Until men stop raping and killing us, this is our right, and we have to stand up for this and tell men, if they find it so threatening that we have our own spaces, stop abusing us, and we'll be perfectly happy, I'm sure, to see you walking around a changing room with your bit of grizzle hanging down in between your legs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. I think I remember, excuse me, a couple of years ago hearing you tell a little anecdote that when trigger warnings were first introduced, there was a trigger warning called Trigger Warning Julie Bindel, and I think it's understandable, having heard that, why that might well be. And some interesting issues there to talk about, particularly I think the relationship with public spaces and women's limited access even to navigate public spaces. We have it on license, we have it on license for a certain number of hours of the day, for a certain number of months of the year. And as you say, that threat hangs over all women because of the actions of a few, Thank you very much, Julie.